So over the past 2 years, I tested pretty much every single glucose-lowering method I could find. I drank vinegar, I ate my food in a certain order, I added a veggie starter, and so many other things. And some things did somewhat work, others not at all, like the vinegar. But there was one thing that worked remarkably well, every single time. And that was simply moving after I eat. And no matter what kind of physical activity, like walking, lifting, even cleaning, it all works. But I noticed some types of activity, they work better than others. And what was interesting is you can further improve the effectiveness with things like intensity and even timing. So when you do these things, right after you eat, 15 minutes later, 30, or even later. So I would like to show you what I found works best to lower a blood sugar spike after you eat. And then also why it works. Because once you know this, you can use this strategically. And also what's the best timing, so when to do it. But before I get into any of this, I want to show you this. This is a screenshot of my CGM app. And you can see here this prolonged glucose curve. And soon after I start my workout, it drops. And that was the first time that I actually saw with my own eyes how effective activity can be to lower blood sugar after you eat. So what kind of activity works best? I tested like upper body workout, a lower body workout, brisk walking, leisurely walking, movement bursts, and cleaning. And they all work. And they work for a reason. Muscles are your body's biggest glucose sink. Sometimes it's also referred as glucose sponge because your muscles use glucose as their primary fuel. So when you contract muscles, you kind of open up the door to your muscles for glucose to come in. And what's pretty cool about this pathway is that it doesn't require any insulin. So the classic way, the way that's most talked about is that you eat carbs and they get broken down into glucose, and then glucose triggers the pancreas to release insulin. And then insulin comes and takes the glucose from your bloodstream and puts it inside your cells, muscle cells and all the other cells that use glucose. But the thing is, insulin isn't instantaneous. It takes time. And in the meanwhile, glucose can still rise until it's cleared. And with muscle contraction, you can kind of get a head start. So these two pathways, they can work hand in hand. So why do some activities work better than others? Because some activities use bigger muscles. And the bigger the muscle, the bigger the glucose demand. And that's why things like walking or a leg workout work better than, for example, cleaning just with your arms. Because the lower body has bigger muscles than the upper body. And intensity can further increase glucose uptake. So what I found is that a strenuous workout works better than a brisk walk, works better than a leisurely walk. And then of course, duration also plays a role in effectiveness. The longer you do the activity, the more glucose gets pulled out of your bloodstream. And then I also tested different timings. So I did the activity right after eating, 15 minutes later, 60 minutes later, or even later than that. First off, it's always helpful. So no matter when you do the activity, it always helps because whenever you contract muscles, they take glucose out of your bloodstream. And that matters because the longer your blood sugar is elevated, the higher the risk of glycation, meaning damage happening. So whenever you contract muscles and do the activity, you help clear the bloodstream faster, and that's always helpful. Now, if you want to flatten the actual peak, then it makes sense to start the activity earlier. So what's earlier? To determine that, it is helpful to know when the peak actually happens. So in theory, the peak usually happens 60 to 75 minutes after you eat a mixed meal. So protein, fiber, fat, and carbs. That's mixed. And when I looked at my data from my CGM, I found the same. Now, when you eat highly digestible or quickly digestible, high glycemic foods like cookies, ice cream, cake, then the peak happens earlier. I found between 40 to 45 minutes after eating. And the same is true when you eat foods that delay gastric emptying, so digestion, like fat. I tracked once a crepe made of green banana flour and I spread butter and peanut butter on it. So it was super fatty and the fat delayed the digestion and the peak happened 2 hours later. So that's helpful to know, to time your activity accordingly. I mean, the best thing you can do is test it for yourself with a CGM because its blood sugar is very highly individual. Everyone responds differently to different foods and glucose lowering methods and meal compositions. For example, the vinegar didn't do anything for me, but I know in research settings, it can work pretty well. And I also have friends, so a couple, they tested some of those glucose lowering methods and for them, the vinegar worked. So you never really know until you test it. So physical activity using your muscles works really well for day-to-day glucose. But you can also improve your long-term glucose and insulin sensitivity and metabolic health. And diet is one part of it, but another big part is adding tissue that responds well to insulin, so muscle. And I talk about that in depth in one of my videos. So if you would like to know more about that, then click onto that video and I'll see you there.